At the age of 29, my relationship with Jessica, then 27, concluded suddenly and with great sorrow. 3 months have passed since we finalized the divorce, yet the emotions remain fresh and intense. Eleanor had been unfaithful with my younger brother, William, as everyone refers to him, and to complicate things further, she found herself expecting his child. It seems the signs were evident long before I realized, but 4 months ago, when she revealed her pregnancy, everything began to fall apart. Initially, Eleanor insisted vehemently that the baby belonged to me. She even got emotional when she shared it with me, as if it were a poignant moment for us to experience together. Yet, William's frequent appearances stirred a sense of suspicion within me, despite my initial efforts to dismiss those doubts. On a restless night, those uncertainties kept me awake. There was something unsettling about William's behavior. The way he would hover near Eleanor, rest his hand on her belly, as if it were the most ordinary thing imaginable. It gnawed at me. Eleanor would dismiss it, claiming I was overanalyzing or acting insecure. Yet, the unsettling sensation lingered on. At last, I made the choice to look at her phone while she was in a deep slumber. A part of me hesitated to uncover anything, yet beneath the surface, I was aware of the reality that lay ahead. And there it lay, the correspondence between her and William, validating all my deepest anxieties. It wasn't merely an affair. They had shared a significant journey together, and the child she was expecting, that didn't belong to me. It belonged to him. The following morning, when I confronted Jessica, she initially attempted to deny it, weaving a tale about how I had misunderstood the situation. Yet, I possessed all the evidence required, and in due time, she confessed to it all. For months, she and William had been covertly meeting, and her intention was to keep me oblivious until after the baby arrived. Their elaborate scheme involved revealing the news, proceeding with a divorce, and embarking on a new life together, all while relying on the child support they anticipated I would provide. That marked the conclusion of our Robert union, and truthfully, I ought to have anticipated it. Reflecting on the past, it seems this act of treachery was merely the last blow to a life that had been unraveling for years. My connection with my family has always been tumultuous, to say the least. From a young age, it was evident that William held a special place in my parents' hearts, Henry and Lily. He was always in the right, while I found myself constantly needing to validate my wife, or even worse, fix the chaos he left behind. The most vivid illustration of this was the moment I got my college acceptance letter. As I stepped into the house, a wave of excitement washed over me, only to discover that a party was in full swing. Initially, I believed they were honoring my significant announcement, but then I noticed the cake. It was intended for William. They celebrated him with a party, completely overlooking my accomplishment. When I inquired about the reason, my parents explained that they wished to ensure William didn't feel excluded, emphasizing that I should prioritize supporting him over my own desires. That moment shattered a part of me. On that particular day, I resolved that I was finished with them. The instant I reached 18, I gathered my belongings and departed. After that moment, I found myself navigating the journey alone. I navigated my college years by balancing part-time jobs and managing loans to ensure I could cover my expenses. Upon completing my studies, I shared a modest flat with a friend and began the journey of constructing my life from the very foundation. My parents never contacted me, and to be honest, I didn't anticipate that they would. As the years passed, I believed I had successfully closed that chapter of my life. Out of nowhere, William reached out to me last year. He mentioned that my parents were longing for me and wished to rekindle our bond. During that period, I was in a marriage with Jessica, and everything felt quite settled. I believed I had left the past behind, yet beneath the surface, I realized I still bore the burden of my family's history. Despite my reservations, I found myself consenting to the meeting. Our initial encounter was undeniably uncomfortable, to put it mildly. It seemed as though I was facing unfamiliar faces, instead of those who had nurtured me. However, it appeared they were striving to repair the situation, so I thought it would be wise to make an effort as well. Gradually, we began to spend more time together. I extended an invitation to my home, a decision that ultimately proved to be a significant error. It was at that moment that William encountered Jessica. Back then, it didn't seem significant to me. William exuded charm, while Eleanor maintained her politeness. It appeared harmless at first glance. Unbeknownst to me, The bond was far from pure. Before long, William began to make more frequent visits. He arrived with the guise of wanting to enjoy my company, yet it soon became evident that his true interest lay with Jessica. They would share furtive glances when they believed I was oblivious, and the nature of their interactions began to unsettle me. Nevertheless, I was hesitant to make any hasty judgments. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, but when Eleanor revealed her pregnancy and William started showing up more often, the warning signs became impossible to overlook. When I stumbled upon those texts, it felt like everything unraveled. They had not only been covertly plotting behind my back, but they had also envisioned a future that completely sidelined me, save for my financial contributions. It felt as though I had been caught off guard by those I believed were on my side. When the truth emerged, my parents swiftly aligned themselves with their perspective. Mom and Dad openly expressed their support for William and Jessica, dismissing what they had done to me as if it were insignificant. It was as if the sting of betrayal had resurfaced, not only from Eleanor but from my whole family as well. It appears that all the kind words from my family about treating me and William the same were nothing more than hollow assurances. When Eleanor and William shared the news of our divorce on social media along with their engagement, my family didn't merely accept it, they rejoiced in it. They enveloped them in support and kind words, as if they had achieved something virtuous rather than shattering my existence. No one seemed to acknowledge the harm inflicted on my mental well-being or the way they shattered the last remnants of trust one had in others. It wasn't merely that Eleanor had been unfaithful for months. It was the sheer betrayal of her spending 6 entire months deceiving me, convincing me that the baby was mine. The anguish of losing her was already overwhelming, but the realization that I had also lost the child I believed was mine, that was a deeper wound. That was an experience I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy. When I sought solace from my parents, they completely disregarded my suffering. They insisted this was for the best, urging me to feel joy for Eleanor and William. Content. For those individuals, it was like a sudden jolt of reality. They didn't even make an effort to acknowledge that William's actions towards me were inappropriate. Instead, they encouraged me to partake in the festivities. That was the breaking point for me. Once more, I severed ties, mirroring the decision I made when I departed from home years prior. However, on this occasion, their meddling only exacerbated the situation. Eleanor left the divorce with a substantial settlement and my car in her possession. With my parents aligning with her and William, her lawyer crafted a narrative portraying me as toxic and controlling, claiming I pressured her to leave her job when it was actually her choice from the start. My parents didn't merely support her. They went to the extent of informing the court that they had severed ties with me years prior due to my alleged misogynistic behavior and outbursts. Their testimony against me left me with no hope of success. The odds were heavily against me, resulting in a considerable financial loss. The sole bright spot was that I managed to retain the house, which provided me with a semblance of stability after everything crumbled around me. Upon the finalization of the divorce, I experienced a peculiar blend of relief and fatigue. I felt a sense of relief that it had finally come to an end. Fortunately, in my area, there's no required waiting time for divorces, and Eleanor didn't oppose it, allowing me to finalize everything swiftly. My only desire was to leave behind Jessica, William, and my parents for good, never to cross paths with them again. It was simpler to say than to actually forget everything, yet I immersed myself in my tasks. It was the sole method I understood for managing my feelings. I poured every ounce of effort into my work, resolute in my quest to bury the haunting memories of this nightmare as deeply as possible. In the end, my hard work bore fruit. Recently, I received a significant promotion. It arrived with an improved title, a larger paycheck, and even a fancier company car. It was as if a new chapter had begun, and for the first time in ages, I experienced true happiness. In honor of the occasion, I chose to indulge in a solo dinner at one of my beloved restaurants. I felt compelled to share it online. It was a modest attempt to express my joy to the world, yet it ultimately proved to be an error. A day or two later, my mother got in touch. She reached out to me, inviting me to come over for a visit. I was utterly astonished. Following all that transpired, the divorce, their overt backing of Eleanor and William, I found it hard to fathom what they expected from me at this point. I overlooked her message, anticipating she'd pick up on the subtlety. Yet she remained oblivious. Instead, she began to call me incessantly. When I failed to answer, she chose to appear at my office. The commotion she created was nothing short of mortifying. To put it mildly, she engaged in a heated exchange with my receptionist and insisted on staying until I consented to meet with her. I assured her that I would stop by in a few days to encourage her to leave my office. That appeared to appease her, and she ultimately departed. Yet I could sense the tension simmering within me. I had no desire to encounter her, or any of the others, yet I certainly didn't want her making another appearance at my job. A few days later, I hesitantly made the visit. My parents had relocated to a more spacious home, one that could comfortably welcome the newborn Eleanor had just brought into the world 3 weeks prior. It was obvious that the settlement money I had paid was supporting their new way of living. To be honest, it really didn't affect me that much. At this stage, the alimony had become a minor part of my income, and I was able to manage it with ease. Upon my arrival, William was absent, and Eleanor was in a deep slumber, leaving only my parents and me in the house. I skipped the small talk. I took a seat, bided my time, and allowed the quiet to stretch until my dad finally broke the stillness with the reason for their call. William found himself out of work, and it seemed that the settlement and alimony were no longer sufficient to sustain their home. They acknowledged having seen my post regarding the promotion and expressed their desire for my assistance. I found myself at a loss for words. Years ago, my parents stepped away from their careers. William found himself without a job. Eleanor had no intention of rejoining the workforce in the near future, and now a newborn had entered the scene. Naturally, their funds were dwindling. Yet, the sheer boldness of it all, following all that they had put me through, was something I simply couldn't comprehend. How could they possibly believe it was acceptable to request my assistance? I was utterly taken aback by my father's words, leaving me speechless for several minutes. I stood there, allowing the words to settle, until the realization finally struck me. I owed them nothing, especially after all they had put me through. Silently, I rose and made my way directly to the door. I could hear my parents calling after me, pleading for me to pause and listen, but I continued on my path. As I swung the door open to step outside, I was met with the sight of William waiting just beyond the threshold. He appeared taken aback by my presence, likely due to the unexpected nature of my arrival, especially in such a dramatic fashion. Despite my parents' persistent attempts to sway me, I brushed off their pleas and ventured out into the relentless downpour. The rain poured relentlessly, drenching me completely as I trudged towards my car, which sat just beyond their lawn. At that point, my irritation was reaching its peak. Amidst the tempest, my soaked garments, and the nerve to seek my assistance after all that transpired, I found myself in a particularly irritable state. Then, as if to push my limits even more, they trailed behind me into the open air. As I rummaged through my pockets in search of my keys, William's voice suddenly reached my ears. This time, it was he who was making the appeal. It was certainly unusual to witness William, of all individuals, setting aside his pride and reaching out to me for assistance. He had always exuded a sense of confidence and superiority, a result of the constant adoration my parents bestowed upon him throughout his life. Observing him in the rain, nearly begging, it became evident that the situation was indeed as dire as they had portrayed. It surely required significant effort to persuade William to descend from his lofty position and plead with me for anything. Yet, rather than experiencing sympathy, I was overcome by another emotion, anger. I lost my composure. "Leave me be," I exclaimed, my voice trembling with fury. "If you're truly in need of funds, perhaps you could consider asking passers-by for assistance on the street. They might feel more sympathy for you than I do." With that, I entered my car, forcefully closed the door, and sped away, leaving them behind in the downpour. I must admit, it was quite gratifying at that moment. After enduring a lifetime of neglect and mistreatment, witnessing them confront the repercussions of their choices felt almost like a release. However, 2 days later, I find myself questioning whether I made the right choice. My mother has been messaging me incessantly, loading me up with guilt. A part of me contemplates whether I ought to lend them a hand. I have sufficient funds that offering them a small amount wouldn't impact my finances at all. Yet, whenever I reflect on it, it seems as though they are merely exploiting me once more, capitalizing on my achievements while disregarding the hurt they've inflicted. I can't help but feel that assisting them would merely demonstrate that they can trample on my boundaries whenever it suits them. Ultimately, I resolved to take a stand. I informed my mother that if she continued to reach out, I would have to involve my legal team. I hadn't intended to take it to that level, yet her constant nagging had worn me down. It was to be expected that they wouldn't take it lightly. A few days later, William arrived at my house unexpectedly, seeking a conversation. The dialogue began with a semblance of civility, if one could even describe it as such, but it swiftly deteriorated. He expressed sympathy for how I had been treated during my upbringing, yet immediately followed it with a statement so absurd that I found it hard to believe. He said to me, without a hint of irony, that he couldn't help but be inherently superior to me, and that was the reason our parents favored him. Then he had the nerve to imply that I was the one being childish for harboring resentments. He suggested that I should cease my unusual behavior towards our parents and simply assist them, as they were facing difficulties. I was powerless to resist. I chuckled right at him. "Are you truly listening to your own words?" I inquired, shaking my head. "Rather than attempting to manipulate my feelings, perhaps you ought to focus on searching for employment." "Well, you know," in a mature way. That resonated deeply. His self-satisfied exterior shattered, and he began to shout. He claimed that I was envious of him, regarding the favoritism of our parents, even of Jessica. He asserted that my refusal to assist stemmed from a desire for retribution, fueled by the notion that everyone favored him over me. At that moment, I found it impossible to regard him with any seriousness. I completely agreed with him. I said, expressionless, "This narrative revolves around retribution, and can you believe it? There's absolutely nothing you can change regarding this situation." That appeared to be the final straw for him. He burst out, but not without cautioning me that he would pursue me and compel me to surrender the money by any means necessary. I chose not to engage in a debate. Allow him the opportunity. William loves to chatter, but when it comes to following through, we both see the truth. To be honest, I feel quite at ease. He can blow his hot air all he likes, but ultimately, there's nothing he can do to affect me. After a lengthy period, I finally sense a grip on my life, and I refuse to allow him, or anyone else in my so-called family, to strip that away from me. Revision 2. 3 days ago, William appeared at my doorstep once more, likely believing he could sway my decision. Warning, the outcome was not successful. My parents had previously attempted the same approach, and it didn't yield positive results for them either. I believed they would eventually get the message and give me some space, yet I misjudged their relentless nature and sense of entitlement. This time, Eleanor was chosen to handle their unsavory tasks. She reached out unexpectedly, and initially, I hesitated to pick up the phone. I anticipated it would be just a repetition of what had come before. Manipulative tactics, insincere compassion, and hollow assurances. However, I realized that if I ignored the call, she could very well appear at my doorstep, much like my mother had, and I certainly wasn't prepared to handle another spectacle in public. With a hint of hesitation, I responded. Initially, her tone was serene and courteous, which nearly brought a smile to my face. She began by recognizing that she grasped my reluctance to assist them. She even acknowledged that, after all they had put me through, I was under no obligation to do anything for any of them. However, she swiftly changed her approach, urging me to rise above and consider offering assistance regardless. Eleanor attempted to evoke sympathy, recalling how my parents had covered all expenses during my upbringing and emphasizing her efforts to be a supportive spouse. I was astonished by her audacity. My parents didn't cover all my expenses during my childhood. They overlooked me and directed all their focus towards William. What about Jessica? Indeed, she was an exceptional partner. If you overlook the fact that she betrayed me with my own brother, it goes without saying that her brief address fell flat. I made it clear to her that I wouldn't be offering any assistance. I highlighted that I was already contributing a significant amount towards her unwarranted alimony, which she had only obtained by misrepresenting the truth and portraying me as a villain throughout the divorce proceedings. I pointed out that she and my family had no problem sacrificing me to achieve their goals, so she shouldn't anticipate any sympathy from me at this point. That's when the emotions began to flow. Eleanor started to cry, accusing me of being selfish and heartless. I couldn't help but notice the irony in her words. I remained resolute, unwilling to conform. Then she uttered something that, while not unexpected, still ignited a fire within me. She informed me that William was correct regarding my actions and that I had given her no alternative but to involve the authorities. She warned that she would return to court to seek an increased alimony payment, asserting that I had humiliated her and deserted her family. In that instant, a revelation struck me. I felt no fear in the face of her threats. During the initial divorce proceedings, I found myself so emotionally drained that I didn't even attempt to put up a fight. I allowed her and my family to weave their narratives about me being toxic and controlling. I chose not to dispute anything. I simply wished for it to come to an end. What about now? At this moment, I felt prepared. If Eleanor sought a confrontation, I would deliver an unforgettable experience. Update 3. Keeping her promise, Eleanor indeed submitted a request for an increased alimony payment, using my recent promotion as her rationale. This time, however, I was determined not to back down and let her triumph. I resolved to push forward with all my strength. I began by contacting our shared acquaintances. I revealed it all: the affair, the deceit, and the treatment I endured from Eleanor and my family. Many were unaware of the true cause behind our split. Their reactions were a mix of shock and revulsion upon hearing the complete account, and a number of them expressed their willingness to stand up for me should it be necessary. Having support from others was a refreshing experience. I had a conversation with my lawyer and expressed my desire to terminate the alimony arrangement completely. Eleanor was not entitled to a single cent from me, and I was resolute in conveying that in court. My attorney concurred and indicated that we would require compelling evidence to bring it to fruition. In the days that followed, I collected all that I could find. I unearthed old messages, emails, and any records I could locate that showcased my family's harmful behavior. I even contacted a few of my cousins who had seen firsthand how my parents treated me during my childhood. We had never shared a deep bond, yet they graciously consented to advocate for me. They understood I wasn't embellishing when I expressed that I had been regarded as an outsider within my own family. Bit by bit, I constructed my argument. When I finally presented everything to my lawyer, he was quite taken aback. He assured me that our case was strong and that we could potentially not only prevent Eleanor from receiving additional alimony, but also terminate the payments entirely. After a long time, I finally sensed that I was in control. I was standing my ground, not merely protecting myself. I was finally confronting those individuals who had taken so much from me and expected me to continue offering without question. This time, there would be an absence of compassion, no opportunities for redemption, and no moments of doubt. Eleanor and my so-called family aimed to pressure me. All right, allow them. I was prepared to demonstrate just how mistaken they were in their perceptions of me. Everyone knew that Eleanor had been unfaithful, but the way she twisted the narrative was what really got under my skin. She portrayed herself as the victim, cast me in the role of the villain, and depicted William as the supposed hero who had saved her from a wretched existence with me. The fabrications were intricate, crafted to safeguard her reputation at the expense of my own. Throughout the divorce, I chose not to resist. I found myself too emotionally exhausted to clarify the situation. However, on this occasion, this time, I was prepared, and I refused to let them escape unscathed. Upon our arrival at court, I laid out all the evidence I possessed. I presented multiple video testimonials from friends and a few relatives who supported my stance, demonstrating that Jessica's assertions, along with my family's story, were entirely false. They were completely unprepared for the impact. They entered with the assumption that I would submit as I had in the past, but they were utterly mistaken. The years of suffering and treachery had forged a tough exterior within me. The emotional vulnerability I once displayed has vanished, giving way to a resolute commitment to assert myself at last. When the judge ruled in my favor yesterday, declaring that I was no longer obligated to pay Eleanor any alimony, I felt an overwhelming sense of joy and relief wash over me. The sense of relief was beyond words. Observing my family squirm as their deceptions fell apart was the perfect finishing touch. Their once smug expressions, worn with such confidence, vanished, giving way to shock and humiliation. What about Jessica? She appeared as though she might burst into tears at any moment. But to be completely frank, I found it impossible to muster any concern. Her feigned sorrow held no significance for me anymore. As I exited the courthouse, reflections of my journey flooded my mind. This chapter of my life has come to a close, allowing me to look ahead with a sense of liberation, free from the burdens of Eleanor and my dysfunctional family. I chose to indulge in some delicious takeaway and enjoy a captivating film. For the first time in years, a sense of freedom washed over me, and I was determined to protect it from anyone who might try to spoil it. However, my family had other plans, determined to disrupt my happiness and tranquility. As I neared my home, I spotted William's car waiting outside. Perplexed, I drove into the driveway, only to discover my whole family gathered by the front door, obstructing my entrance. I halted, completely perplexed. For a brief instant, words eluded me entirely. Then I resolved to feign indifference to their presence. "Leave my property immediately," I stated plainly, "or I will contact the authorities." My father advanced, his face flushed with fury. "You ought to feel a deep sense of shame for your actions today," he exclaimed with disdain. He erupted in a passionate outburst, charging me with irresponsibility and claiming I had betrayed my family by not offering my support when they required it the most. His words oozed with superiority, as if he still thought I was indebted to them. I chose not to reply. I would not grant him, or any of them, the pleasure of witnessing my distress. I remained there in quietude, allowing him to express his frustrations. It was evident that they were feeling frustrated. It was evident they had arrived with the intention of provoking a confrontation, anticipating that I would lose my composure and act foolishly. Yet, I refused to be ensnared by their cunning scheme. When my mother insisted that I demonstrate respect and communicate with my father, I remained silent. My quietude only appeared to fuel their fury. They shouted and waved their arms frantically, yet I stayed composed, unshaken. In an instant, William lost his composure. He charged at me, seized my collar, and his expression suggested he was ready to throw a punch. Before he had the chance, my dad intervened and drew him away. "You're just a bitter failure," William yelled, his voice quaking with fury. "You will never achieve anything of significance." I couldn't help but laugh. The irony of hearing those words from an unemployed man living with his parents and begging his brother for money wasn't lost on me. "Right," I said with a smile, coming from the guy who has nothing better to do than leech off everyone around him. "Good one, William." That seemed to hit a nerve, and I could see the fury in his eyes. But before he could react, I took a step back. "I'll say it one more time," I said firmly. "Get off my property, or I'm calling the cops, and considering how broke you all are, I'd suggest you run before you add legal fees to your problems." Grudgingly, they left, though not without one last-ditch effort from my mom to guilt me into handing over some cash. She tried every tactic in the book, shaming, pleading, even tears, but I didn't budge. Eventually, they realized I wasn't going to cave, and they drove off. It's been almost a day since that encounter, and for the first time in a long time, my phone has been blissfully silent. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. I can only hope it stays this way. For once, I feel like I've finally put them behind me. I don't know what the future holds, but at least now, I can move forward without them dragging me down.